Welcome to On Her Terms Defined. I'm your host, Charlene Ketchum, and joining me today is Mrs. Olivia Baylor. She's a licensed clinical professional counselor from Life Revisions Counseling in Catonsville, Maryland. She also works as an affirmative therapist, couples therapist with experience working with military personnel, sports professionals, and assists people with developing self-esteem, interracial, interreligious challenges and concerns. She also has training in trauma. She's also a registered yoga instructor. She's published 3 books related to dating and relationships. The first, Before I Do, I've got a copy of that one. This is actually a premarital counseling workbook. And she also has My Therapy Journal. That is a 6-month fillable notebook and journal to track your therapy goals, progress, and growth. And then this spring, she's publishing How Do I Date? And you can pre-order that book at oliviabaylor.com. And we'll have the link for that included in the description box on the YouTube video and on the SheConfidential.com website. So today, the two of us will be talking about how you can ditch dating drama. This episode will arm you with insights to have healthier and more intentional dating experiences. So the interesting thing about this conversation is that I read the other day that online dating skyrocketed during COVID. You know, we had all the stay-at-home orders and we couldn't physically be with our normal groups as we would normally be, but people found a way to make connections. Or is that really what they were seeking? So I read that there are more online dating platforms, including on Facebook. Tinder saw huge increases. eHarmony, Match saw huge increases in online dating activity. Now, whether or not people were actually transitioning from the virtual environment to in-person is a whole other thing. And the article that I read didn't speak to that. But it was very interesting to me that during this time of all this turmoil and just fear, that people were seeking to start new relationships or build new connections. And then I also heard from a very good friend of mine that she actually she read an article about people actually asking people out on dates in the vaccine lines. So people were in line waiting for their vaccinations and they were setting up dates. So are you surprised by this increase in online dating during this high stress time during the pandemic and the hookups and the vaccine waiting lines?
Well, first, Charlene, thank you for having me on the show. I'm very happy to be here. In regards to your question, I'm not really surprised at all. Essentially, a couple of things have been happening during this COVID pandemic time. Is on one end, you have people who've always been kind of single and on their own, and so you've seen an increase of them realizing that they've been on their own for this time. And so they've been seeking that connection with others, which is why you're seeing like the more people going online and Facebook joining groups, dropping DMs into other people's accounts, and even getting in line and wanting to connect with people, because essentially, they're realizing at a certain point they're lonely. The other aspect that's been happening is a lot of people during this time have been doing a lot more almost self evaluation of their relationships, the people who are around them, their life, because they have a lot of people who are passing. So when death is typically around people start evaluating their certain life and the status and things that they've been doing. And so that is also another aspect that's been happening, where people have either ended relationships or started new relationships, or they have evaluated their relationships in themselves to determine that, hey, I've got more time on my hand, and this relationship that was working pre-COVID is not working anymore. And so you have people just ending relationships and starting new ones.
Is that normal, like during times of stress? I mean, I know that COVID is really an unprecedented event, so it's kind of hard to have another point of reference, but is that normal just for people to instinctively do those evaluations or seek companionship during times of high stress and turmoil?
Yes. I mean, during high stress, people usually do evaluate themselves and, where their lives are, because at that moment you're trying to almost get out of that certain environment. And so you're looking at other aspects of your life. You do see it a lot more during like grief as well, where you do kind of that look at your life, because they look at the passing of others. And especially during this time period, um, I I don't really know of anybody who hasn't known of either one person or knew somebody who passed away from COVID. So it's really hard for people to, attend funerals virtually, or, they're saying, I'm sorry for your loss on Facebook, to somebody, to not then look at their own selves and say, this could have been me
Right.
at any time. And so that self evaluation is happening just a lot more, especially during this time. And any times of high stress, high grief, and loss, people want to know what's going on with themselves.
Right. And you said a word that really kind of stood out to me when you mentioned the grief. I think that over the past year, and I've heard a few people frame it this way, but I don't think that we've looked at it this way in a just overall sense, that we've had this collective grief that
Hmm.
I don't think that we've experienced as a country, maybe not since 9/11, but
Hmm.
even this, because it's so constant. 9/11 was one day.
Hmm.
And, this it's been a year now of
Yeah.
dealing with this collective grief and this heightened fear and uncertainty.
Hmm.
And so I know that one of the things that I've read, and when I was in grief counseling years ago, was try not to make major decisions or major
Hmm.
changes, when you're grieving. And so it's
Hmm.
kind of interesting that, we all have been experiencing this collective grief, and yet people are doing a lot of, or, they're doing a lot of self-reflection and
Hmm.
analysis and that are leading to some major decisions and major changes.
Yes. Yes, a lot of people are. And also you have to think about, there's a couple other things. You think about the political environment. You also think about the
Mhm.
racial divide that has happened. Our country is, not just our country. Everywhere is dealing with trauma all around. And
Mhm.
so, a lot of people are making decisions that may not be the best decisions. In some cases, it might be the best decisions. We don't know based off of their
Yeah.
individual situation, but that is essentially what we're seeing happening now. And I feel as though, and many people in the therapeutic world agree, that this is going to continue. The trauma and the effect of this will continue for quite some time, because of just how many people were impacted by it, and in different avenues of that impact as well.
Wow. So that's another trauma to add into the bucket that we bring into dating. As if it's not hard enough.
Yeah.
So so on season 1 of On Her Terms Defined, it was episodes 1 and no, it was episodes 2 and 3. And I think it was on episode 2 where I made a comment saying that I was tired of dating, or maybe I didn't say it on the show, maybe I said it later on a
Hmm.
social media post, but I mentioned that I've gone on dozens of dates.
Hmm.
And it was really funny. People who know me, yeah, they know.
Hmm.
But people who didn't know me were like, "Oh my God, you really been on dozens of dates?"
Hmm.
And a lot of it is just you go to meet people. Like things that some people call a date, I don't necessarily call a date, because I've done online dating, and the first time I meet somebody in person, that's not really a date for me. That's a me feeling your energy in person, because
Hmm.
talking on the phone or in a virtual environment is very different from being in
Hmm.
someone's presence. So I don't necessarily call that a date, even though a lot of people do. And so I threw that in the dating bucket, which is why I can say I've dated dozens, because it's like, okay,
Hmm.
I did a meetup with lots of people. But dating was already hard. And
Hmm.
now post
Hmm.
COVID, I wonder how that will impact it even more. So, first, I would just like to talk about, why is dating so hard? When I was doing a Google search to see what people are asking Google about
Hmm.
dating, and I started typing, why is dating? And then so hard was like the first thing that came up.
Hmm. Hmm.
So a lot of people apparently are struggling with dating.
So that's actually a very broad question, because the reason why I say that is there's
Yes.
so many layers to the difficulties within dating. The number one I would say from my, clientele and experience is expectations. That is the number one thing.
Mhm.
You openly communicated about where you feel that the first time you meet somebody, it's not considered a date.
Yeah.
However, your expectations are completely different than the other person's expectations, who may assume this is a
Yeah.
date. I think
Yes.
that when people go into relationships, they have these expectations set that they have not already checked to see if the other person has those same expectations. So as you go out and start to date or go on a date, and even when it comes to paying for a date,
Yes.
how people view it, and they say, well, this date didn't work out because this person did this and this and this. They have no idea that that was an expectation that you had when
Yeah.
first going out on a date. And I think it really comes down to a lack of communication, and also, the expectations and the
Yeah.
assumptions. Um, Compatibility. Everybody, people will look at compatibility tests. People will look online and
Yeah.
try to figure out ways that they are compared. But you have to make sure that you are compatible. Just because those things all outlined, there's so many other factors that fall into place.
Yes.
Family upbringing. What was your family like? If you come from a
Mhm.
household where you came from a single family household, where there are no, set relationship expectations, you
Yeah.
copy that as a learned behavior and then
Right.
transfer that into your relationship. Cultural differences. Is your culture so different that you can't grasp or be able to compromise with one another?
Yeah.
You think about boundaries. What are your boundaries compared to the other person's boundaries? Some people will say, hey, I want you to call me every day. That's another expectation. And then that person calls once a week, and you're like, well, forget you. You didn't call me every day. I mean,
It's
and
a
then you say
problem.
dating is so hard. Yeah, this is so difficult to date, but you don't really process and talk about those expectations.
Yep.
Um, you also talk about friends. I mean, what is their influence on you and who you're talking to or who you're dating? Family
Yep.
members, what are they saying, or what are they saying that you need to a certain type of person you need to date? Um, you can even talk about oh goodness, being an only child and struggling as an only child with sharing, and you're with a person who says, well, let's do this 50-50.
Yeah.
You're like, no, this is not going to work out. This is not going to
Yeah.
work out. This dating is difficult. So
Yep.
that's why I say it's a very
It
loaded question,
is.
because of all those layers within it.
And you just touched on, there's so many things, like, oh my goodness, we could do a whole series, or people could buy your books and get some insights on all these things too. Uh, One, the compatibility thing. So a friend and I, we were talking about, you know, should we really be searching or emphasizing compatibility? Because you can do
Mhm,
all these different tests. Like I look at astrology, I don't put
mhm,
everything into the signs, but it's like there are some things that are true. And I'm a
mhm,
Capricorn. I have a lot of real Capricorn traits. And so when you
mhm,
look at the different things, whether it's astrology or just, the order, birth order, or all those things when we talk about compatibility. But when we go deeper with compatibility, it sounds like, and you can correct me if this isn't the appropriate word, that you were kind of leaning towards looking at what is complementary to you
mhm,
instead of just looking at that surface on this person. I'm compatible with them because, they have this and I have that. And that
mhm,
typically works well together. But that's
mhm,
very general. And what we
mhm,
really should be doing is looking at our individual lifestyles and desires and wants and
mhm,
needs and saying, what is going to complement what my package is and what I
mhm.
need in a
Yes.
partner. And I don't think we distinguish that often when we're dating. We think about, okay, well, this person should be compatible. He's a professional. I'm a professional. I'm looking for somebody
Mhm,
who has no kids and he has no kids. We should be compatible instead of,
mhm,
okay, let's go a little bit deeper than that. Like, does he
mhm,
even want kids? Okay, let's say you both want kids, but how do you want to raise your children? All
mhm,
those things are what goes to what complements partners.
mhm. Yeah, and I think you know, there's like a surface to that we just overall have. So
Mhm.
a homework assignment that I give some clients to do, because they'll say, well, I can't find anybody good. they're not worth my time. And so I actually say, okay, well, I want you to write up a job description of what it would take to date you, because you obviously know what it will take to date you. So what will it take to date you? What are the qualifications that they have to have? What are the skills that they have to have? And
Okay.
then I want you to think of that. But then I also want you to write, what are the skills or qualifications that it's going to take that you are looking for in somebody else, that you think that you have to have? Do they even want to date? Would you want to date you, or would that other person want to date you if you
Yes.
don't have those necessary skills? So you have people say, I can't find any, good man or a good woman, or I can't find a
Mhm.
good person. But you ask them, then what are you looking for? What is it that you're looking for? On surface, they will say, well,
Mm.
somebody that has to have a master's degree, a house, can't
Yeah.
have any kids, has to have a foreign car that they drive,
Yeah.
got to have at minimum $1 million saved in a bank account. But these become surface level dating issues. I
Yes.
mean, qualifications are things that they look for.
Yep.
But then when you'll ask them, okay, well, what if that person has a high school diploma, but doesn't have that money in the savings account? But when there are times when you're in need, they are there for you.
Yeah.
When you are crying, they're there to support you.
Right.
But that other person that has all those other surface things is not there. Who are you
Mhm.
going to pick in that situation? You would have given up somebody because the surface things that you're not actually even qualified for. If we go back to that job description that you're
Yeah.
not even qualified for, you're looking for somebody else to have. So it really comes down to like defining what are the needs, like you said, that we're looking for, we need for
Right.
ourselves, but also being realistic about those needs too. Everybody may want somebody that has $1 million in their bank account, but if this person comes around and they have $23 in their bank account, but they are getting to that $1 million point,
Yeah.
and this is a person that you love, you need to reevaluate what your needs really are.
Right. And I'm over here taking notes. I'm like, and I cannot share that note taking habit. Like I end up doing that every time I'm talking to someone. One of my friends, she was watching and she said, "Were you taking notes while you were talking?" I'm like, "Yes, yes." I'm highlighting different things and some to come back to, but just some keywords and things because that's also how I try to, like, I'll write down a keyword. Like I have accountability and
Mm-hmm.
self-awareness written down. And those are things that I will go back to and really examine myself
Mm-hmm.
later
Mm-hmm.
because, with a lot of what you just said, and you just gave so many insights, but two of the big things that stood out to me were accountability and self-awareness. And what I like about both of those is that they're very empowering because those are things
Mm-hmm.
I can control. Like I
Yeah.
can't control what attributes a partner or potential partner has. I can't control
Mm-hmm.
whether I have what they need, but I
Mm-hmm.
can control how I hold myself accountable to assess what it is I want and need and distinguish those things and how I communicate that to another person. And I can also be self-aware to make those kind of determinations. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the very empowering part. So
Yes.
thank you. Thank you for those insights because that's huge because sometimes it can be really frustrating and especially if you look at the social, and I'm speaking broadly, not specifically about
Mm-hmm.
myself on that one, but
Mm-hmm.
you see all the social media memes and I don't know if you look at social media, but
Mm-hmm.
every day it's a lot of where are all the good people out there or
Yeah.
it's just you would think that there is no love to be found or had in the world
Mm-hmm.
and that
Mm-hmm.
people just can't find good partners and have healthy relationships, and that's actually not true. um,
Mm-hmm.
it starts with personal accountability and
Yes, it
self-awareness
does.
before we can get to that other point. And that's what I like, that homework assignment you just said. And I think is that's in this before I do workbook, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's
Okay,
one of
because
the homework assignments in there.
yes, I was like, I think I saw that, and I was like, oh, okay, I'm gonna save that for for later. But I like that. I mean, because that people talk about unrealistic expectations all the time,
Mm-hmm.
and how do we define whether or not our expectation is unrealistic? I
Mm-hmm.
think is the tricky thing because for some people, like your example with $1 million in the bank, and then you meet this partner who is very kind, they're very attentive, and they're supportive, they're honest, they're
Mhm.
hardworking, they have, you know, a great work ethic, and they share your same spiritual, religious beliefs, but they
Mhm.
don't have any money. To take it back to season one, episodes two and
Mhm.
three, we were talking about the man who's sleeping on a mattress. And
Mhm.
that episode was two men and me and myself and two other women. And it was one of the
Mhm.
guys who gave this example of what about the man who's sleeping on a mattress? He's
Yeah.
on hard times, but
Mhm.
he's a hardworking man. He just went
Mhm.
through, he got laid off or something. He's just having a really rough time. And so he's staying at his grandpa's house and he's living in the basement, sleeping on a mattress. You know, would you date him? You know, but a lot of women who say, yeah, I need him to be making six figures. I'm not going to
Mhm.
date him. And my response
Mhm.
was, I wouldn't date him because I think that if you're in that position, that you probably shouldn't be focusing on dating me.
Mhm.
So you probably need to get your situation a little bit more resolved and established before you come and date me, because that's, I want you to emphasize and focus on yourself rather than me, because I also know myself and I'll make a
Mhm.
project out of it to help get you
Mhm.
off the mattress faster. So that's why I
Yeah.
say I wouldn't date that person. But I also don't want you to be so focused on trying to date me that you're not doing what you need to do to get off the mattress. So
Mhm.
when we talk
Mhm.
about unrealistic expectations, you know, it's very situation specific.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It definitely is. And I think, even with the in a previous show when they discussed that, also being in mind that everybody is never at a perfect state. We'll always be continuously working on
Yes.
ourselves.
Yes.
Um, so, I understand, your take on it, but I also want to make sure that the audience also knows that there's never going to be anybody that's going to be 100% where they're at. And
Absolutely.
so that is an expectation that people will come across and they'll say, oh, they have to have the house, they got to have this, they have to have that. But then at the same time, they could be struggling to pay the bills at that house. They could be going to work,
Yes.
60 hours a week just to be able to make sure that there's food on the table. But
Yes.
to the face of everybody else, it looks like they have everything that you
Mhm.
are looking for. And I think especially during this time, that affects that is COVID, because social media. I'm sorry, because a lot of people are
Mhm.
going back on Instagram and they're seeing all these people,
Yeah.
laying out on the beach, or saying,
Yes.
I've done this during COVID. They're working out they're listing all of these things, and people are at home saying, well, how come I'm not having that, or I don't have that as a
Mhm.
relationship, or I don't have that with the person that I'm with. Um, their expectations are different. We all
Yeah.
know that a lot of stuff that's out there in social media is not true.
Hello.
So there's another factor that adds to it. But I think that this belief of what a relationship is has evolved with a large part social media. Another large part is just in general, with the society changing, and what they're looking for in relationships. So if you think of back in the day in the 20s and 30s, they just wanted a person to be breathing at that point to be able to be in a relationship with them. It was a different take, and they viewed marriage and relationships differently.
Yes.
It was a very important thing in their life. These were the people that sometimes you hear 80, 90 years that they've been together, and they never broke up, they never split up.
Yes.
Um, and now you hear about relationships where they get married and it doesn't work. A week later, they're divorced. So it's a difference with the evolution of society and the changes and exposure. Um, and also, I want to add in there, the people are starting to be able to identify a lot more traumatic behavior of their
Yeah.
partners, and removing themselves out of those situations. Whereas before,
Yes.
it was probably difficult to leave in those relationships, lack of
Mhm.
resources available, lack of safe houses or safe places to go. And then
Mhm.
society had a larger religious impact back then as well, where it
Yes.
was, you're going to leave, and then what are you going to be viewed at in the eyes of God? So there's many different
Right.
things that we can, talk about that come into that
Yes.
situation.
And thank you so much for mentioning that, because so quite often when I've had conversations, and it hasn't been with clinicians or other professionals such as yourself, usually it's with other family members or just older adults in general,
Mhm.
and they'll say, well, young people now, they just don't know how to make marriage work, or they this and that. But I think a lot of it goes to what you just said, that people are identifying, they're recognizing traumatic situations, and they're saying no more.
Mhm.
I don't have to stay for the sake of, saying that I'm married. I don't have to stay in this unhealthy environment. And as we
Mhm.
continue to normalize therapy, as we
Mhm.
continue to normalize what, broaden that definition of self care is more than just going to the spa and doing your nails. As we
Mhm.
continue to have those conversations and normalize those healing behaviors and shifting mindsets, we may see more people,
Yeah.
abandon some of those things, or not abandon them, but really, really choose themselves and choose
Mhm.
their
Mhm.
health. Because as you noted, we are all working on something.
Yeah.
You may not be laying on the mattress, but you may be balancing wellness and self-care. Like that's my struggle, and I'm very transparent about that. I
Mhm.
It may not be the money aspect, but it's just making sure I don't work too much and that I go to bed at a
Mhm.
decent time, or that I choose food that's actually going to nourish and fuel my body, as opposed to giving in to these sugar cravings and things like that.
Mhm.
So we all have something that we're battling, and that's giving ourselves grace, and then extending grace to other people, and then being realistic and saying, I understand that this is your battle or your challenge and where you are right now, but
Mhm.
that may not be compatible with where I am or what
Yeah.
I'm seeking right now. And it's like, it's
Mhm.
totally okay to
Yeah.
recognize that and say that. So I appreciate that you acknowledged that and really just gave that power back to people to say, you don't have to stay in unhealthy situations just for the
Mhm.
sake of maintaining a marriage or a relationship. It's okay to commit to choosing your health.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. 100%.
So important. Do you think that part of the challenges that we have now is that we just have way too many options, with the availability of online dating and the virtual environment?
Um, yes and no. I mean, yes, in the sense that there are more ways, or I want to say it like this: there's easier ways to cheat. I'll say it like that. So when you say more options, yes and no. Easier ways meaning you can start a whole new Facebook page. You can, put certain
Hmm.
friends on that Facebook page.
Yeah.
There's apps in people's phones where they can make a separate folder
Yes.
that their text messages are in, and people can download a different app for phone calls that can come through.
Hmm.
So they have a multitude of options to cheat.
Yeah.
Now, yes, there are more apps that can be used as far as dating apps that they can go to and try to find people to date. Um,
Yeah.
but I think that saying that there are a lot of options as a reason for making dating difficult, I wouldn't agree with. I think that it does, again,
Yeah.
go back to a lot of those other situations. People only commit if they want to be committed in a
Yes.
relationship, and they only date when they want to date. Um, there's things in regards to like emotional maturity levels. Are they ready to date? Are they even at a mature state that they can date?
Right.
Um, so it's not necessarily that there are options available. I just don't think that there are a lot of people who themselves are ready and available and know what to expect when it comes to dating. Um, there, because essentially options doesn't mean compatibility. We can have as many options as
Yes.
possible. We go to buffets all the time. People go to buffets.
Yeah.
Just because you have a multitude of options does not mean that you want to eat everything that's at the buffet. You know exactly what you want to eat. So it's the same
Yeah.
perspective when it comes to dating. So I answer that in a yes or no sense.
Yeah. And I think that's I mean, it makes sense to me. There's not it really depends, because
Mhm.
the availability of the options can be a good thing in a sense that you might meet people that you otherwise would not have met,
Yeah.
you know, thanks to erasing those geographical barriers, and you really
Hmm.
widen that pool. But then also, and this is from my experience, that it, like, to go to what you said about compatibility, that doesn't mean that quantity is not always quality or compatibility. So now
Hmm.
that might mean I've got more, stuff to wade through and kind of toss out. And I've got extra distractions now too,
Yeah.
because in the back of a lot of people's minds, and I know I've thought this before, I don't have to if something's not going the way I want it to, if I don't feel like safe or stable in it, I'm like,
Mhm.
forget that. I don't have to keep talking
Yeah.
to him because I can go talk to somebody else if I want to.
Mhm.
So it's
Mhm.
it's really easy to just say whatever, I can move on because you do have that option. Now there's so many other fish in the sea, as they say.
Yeah.
If you want to constantly keep being entangled and interviewing, if we view this as a job,
Mhm.
interviewing and being interviewed, because
Mhm.
that can be exhausting as well.
Yeah. And I think that it's good that, people can have their dating options. It is your choice to date who you choose to date.
Yes.
Um, I think that the I think the problems come up when they're not honest with what their expectations are when they start to date people or when they start this
Yeah.
journey of dating. So an example, let me say, for example, people will date now and they will say, well, the other person should automatically know that I'm talking to other people the same time that I'm talking to them.
Yeah.
And the question always is, well, how do they know? Have you told them that? Are they aware of that? And then they're surprised when, they make their relationship, official. And then 6 months now down the line, they're like, well, I told them that I was talking to four other people the same time I was talking to them, and they said I cheated on them in the beginning of the relationship. How is that? We weren't even dating. Honesty and communication starts at a very early point in a
Yeah.
relationship, because dating is not the way. And I say the old school way only for the people who remember pre-internet. I say it like
Yes.
that.
I'm free
Pre-internet.
internet.
Yeah. Where it used to be, you met somebody through a friend.
Yeah.
You would meet somebody, at a store. You would
Hmm.
meet people at schools. It was kind
Yeah.
of that direct one-on-one meeting. I mean, even in some cases, people used to meet people in the newspaper back in the day, where they would
Yeah.
put out those ads,
Yeah. Yes.
dating ads in the
Yes.
newspaper. That's how they met people.
Hmm.
And so it was a different expectation, because when they met at that point, it was like, okay, well, our dating starts now because of the work that we did to get to this point. It starts now.
Right.
And when they ask them, are you talking or dating anybody? And they say, no, I'm not dating anybody. That means that you're just talking to me and that's it. Because it wasn't as much of a, like the term, a situationship wasn't there yet. That
Right.
those beliefs and that standard wasn't there yet. But then after internet, it became very different, because the statement
Hmm.
of I'm not dating you yet, so I don't understand why you have these expectations, is frequently said.
Yeah.
And it's fine to not, to date other people at the same time if
Yeah.
that's something that the both of you have communicated about. Because you don't want to go into a relationship where you haven't talked about your expectations,
Hmm.
you haven't talked about your definitions of what is cheating or what is considered to be, even a
Yeah.
relationship. And then you go into it, and then later on, an argument happens. Be honest from the beginning.
Yeah.
Listen, I'm talking to you. I'm dating. I'm dating. Are you dating? You're dating. Okay, that's understandable. That we know where
Yeah.
we stand. And then you can choose to decide to keep going on the dates and then look at the relationship with that person further. But
Right.
if you go in and you're talking to them, and then as you're going down the line, and this person starts becoming serious with you, and they say, I would like for this to be official, and you're like, well, wait a minute, you're number 4 out of 20. I need
Right.
to, check my list. I'm not ready yet. And they're shocked.
Yeah.
And then you say later on, and this is why I keep saying this, because it's a phrase that is always said. There's nobody good out there, but you never give yourself the chance to set up these certain things first in order to even
Yes.
check if this person is even worth that statement to say they're not any good for you.
Right. And what I kept hearing you say was communicating, communicating, communicating. And I
Hmm.
think, and in my personal experience, what has been the challenge is you don't, in an effort to not run people away and make them
Hmm.
think, I'm needy or I'm clingy. There have definitely
Hmm.
been times that where I didn't say, oh, I want a relationship. I'm looking for a relationship, because I didn't
Hmm.
want that person to think, oh, I'm trying to have him be, my mate next week. I don't want him
Yeah.
thinking that. So I'm not
Hmm.
going to come right out the gate and say, you know what, I'm looking for an exclusive relationship. And it took me a long time to get to that point where it's like, you know what? I don't care. I'm going to tell you that
Yeah.
because that'll save both of us some time. Because if you're not
Mm-hmm.
there, or if that's going to scare you away, then you're probably
Mm-hmm.
not somebody I'm going to work out with. And I
Mm-hmm.
had to learn that. But for a long time, I was really hesitant to say that when I first went on a meetup, or even, once I started dating someone, I didn't want to say, yep, this is what I'm looking for, because I didn't
Mm-hmm.
want to appear to be trying to move too fast. And
Mm-hmm.
just in conversations with other people, I think that maybe that fear that will run
Mm-hmm.
someone away blocks a lot of people, or that fear of how they're going to perceive you,
Mm-hmm.
not wanting to
Yes.
appear to be needy or vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly for a lot of men, they don't a lot of times want women to think, oh, I'm weak, or, I'm really, I don't want her to take advantage of me. And so you have to put up this barrier or kind of suppress some of those feelings. And so the the things that you're saying, coming back to communication, are just so important. And those are skills that a lot of us may not have as they relate to dating and relationships. And when it
Mm-hmm.
comes to everything else, I've always been very strong at
Mm-hmm.
communicating at school and in work settings. But in personal relationships, I've had to work. I really
Mm-hmm.
had to learn how to work on that. And it wasn't necessarily that I didn't know what I was thinking or feeling. It was
Mm-hmm.
being able to discern when it was safe enough to share that with someone else and how to communicate that with them. And recently I read that we should view dating as a skill.
Mm-hmm.
And I really thought about that with your job application, your job uh, exercise. So it's like, wow, okay, you really do assess your skills. What skills do you bring to the table? And so, what are
Mm-hmm.
your thoughts on approaching dating as a skill?
Well, I do think that, dating in general is a skill, is a job, is a part of your life, is an expectation. There's a lot that I would
Yeah.
give it. I do want to go back to something else. So when you had talked about the being able to kind of give like a warning to people,
Mm-hmm.
I have something that I call a boundary disclaimer. And so if you think about this, when you watch a movie and they put the disclaimers up in the beginning of the movie
Mm-hmm.
saying, this is not suitable for children,
Yes.
or there's going to be a lot of traumatic event, gunshots, it's going to be
Mm-hmm.
stuff. You need to be prepared for it before it comes out.
Right.
You can do that same thing in a relationship. I teach clients to do that, boundaries, to set those in the beginning,
Mm.
so that those disclaimers in the beginning, so that when that person, before you even take a second step, they already know what to expect.
Okay.
So if you're a person who, let's say it's a struggle because you have been in relationships where people, only want just a hookup, you can let them know,
Mhm.
listen, before we even start talking, this is my disclaimer. So the disclaimer has started. If you think about it in the movie, it's coming across the screen right now.
Yes.
Before we even start talking, my expectations are that I'm looking for a long-term relationship. What are your expectations? And if that person says, well, I'm not looking for that, thank you very much. This is a major expectation that I have, that I need. If that's not where you're at, I don't think we
Yeah.
should waste each other's time. That there moves on and you go
Yes.
on to the next thing. Same thing when people have arguments, listen, or they're, let's say you have frustration, you come home from work, you're frustrated, um, and you go to your partner and you start talking to them, and all of a sudden they want to fix the situation. That's not what you're looking for. You're looking for
Yeah.
them to agree. You
Yeah.
start off with, listen, I need to just let this out. I am not looking
Mhm.
for you to fix this. I just want you to listen. That's a big part of the communication. But I just wanted to make sure I
Okay.
threw that in there for the
I
viewers
love
to
that.
understand that you can put a disclaimer out if you already know that you don't want to waste your time and you don't want to waste that person's time, and you know what your expectations are
Mhm.
for that person, it lets them know what their expectations are for you.
Yeah.
It clears it up automatically.
Absolutely. I love
But
that.
but to go back to thinking, dating is a skill. That's why I do the job description, because it is something that you do have to practice with.
Yeah.
It is something that you have to come in there with communication skills, people skills, social skills. Those are skills that you have to practice. So, and a part of dating, it is like a skill. There are people who are, I don't want to say necessarily bad daters. I want to say that they have either traumatic backgrounds,
Yeah.
uh, not the best communication skills, not the, best with expressing their expectations. They would probably define themselves as a bad dater, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're a bad dater. It's just that they haven't verbalized themselves in the proper way. But it is a skill that does have to be developed because we
Yeah.
don't know what we want in the beginning.
Right.
Um, we come into it with what learned behavior we have viewed a healthy relationship as around us. So if the only relationships that we have seen is the relationships that we've had with our parents or seen with our
Mhm.
parents having, that's what we assume is a healthy relationship.
Right.
And then when we go into relationships, we expect sometimes, and I'll say sometimes because not all the time, but sometimes we expect that other partner to be like the person that we have all seen in our lives growing up.
Mhm.
And that's where that compatibility comes into play. And that is where that self awareness comes into play.
Yes. And so you kind of segued into my next question. I put all kind of stars around boundary disclaimer, by the way. That's a really it's so many issues could be avoided if we were
Hmm.
just transparent in our communication. We
Hmm.
were just self-aware to know what it is that what we really want at that moment, because it can change.
Yeah.
There are times, we talk about those situationships and those hookups all the time where, people
Hmm.
get into it and they're just hooking up. And then somebody
Hmm.
develops feelings and then they don't communicate with that other person. I have these feelings now, and this other person thinks, oh, we're just still hooking up. And then
Hmm.
there's all this drama now because the
Hmm.
relationship dynamic shifted, but nobody spoke up about it. And
Yeah.
just being really upfront and making that commitment to say, you know what, I will tell you if and when my feelings or my needs or wants change.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
you can honor it, or you can say
Well,
this doesn't
I
work
say
for you.
also, yeah, I would say also even doing check-ins. So I have couples do check-ins. Something that I have, and it's in the book, is a box. I will have a couple of couples go and get like a box, and those are the ones that usually have a lot of communication issues and problems with communication or limited time to be around one another. And so there's a particular topic that they want to talk about, but they can't talk about those particular topics either because they don't want to talk about them in front of the kids, or they don't want to drain them when they come home from work. So within that box, they will put the topics and they make it where they have couples time or relationship time where they talk about those topics. And then they also just check in. How are we doing? How are you feeling with our relationship right now? How are you feeling about our communication? It's another way to communicate with one another instead of just simply telling a person, hey, we need to have a talk, because that's the trigger word for some people. It's like, uh-oh,
Yes.
here it is. Here it comes. Instead of it just being, this is our time to go to our box. But
Yeah.
I also make it that they put a positive thing. If they know that in that box is going to be something very traumatic and stressful,
Mhm.
talk about something positive first. Sandwich method is what I call it. Talk about
Okay.
something positive first. You go to that box, you deal with that situation, you talk about something positive again, and then you move on, with that relationship. If there's things in that box that you need to fix, you write another note and you put it in that box, and you come back to it later to check up on it.
I love that. So when do people do that? I want to talk a little bit about the role of therapy in dating and just in relationships in general. So for
Mhm.
the longest time, I only knew of married people going to therapy. I never
Yeah.
knew a lot about pre-marriage counseling or even people who were dating doing that. But now
Hmm.
it seems to be more common that people go to couples therapy just when dating. So can you talk a little bit about what are options for people who are not married but want to get this guidance and coaching from a professional?
So there are people who are dating and they start noticing that there are some issues within their relationship and they want to tackle them there. I usually see that when there are people who know that together they see a future for each other.
Okay.
and they want to make sure that they're addressing these issues first before they even get engaged, to
Mhm.
make sure that the engagement is even worth their time. Um, and then that leads to the premarital counseling. A long time ago, well, I don't even say a long time ago, still goes on now, but typically premarital counseling, you didn't hear about it unless it was at your church that you went to for to
Right.
get married. And they did the premarital counseling there. When you go to it, it's really more of a religious take on the
Mhm.
counseling, because they try to touch on each thing, but they don't really touch on each thing because they can't go as so far because it's
Yes.
viewed as a religious part.
Right.
And there are pastoral counselors and therapists, but sometimes in the couples counseling they're ran by the priest or the deacons or the church members
Yeah.
at the church, and they're not really licensed professionals. Premarital counseling, I feel needs everybody should go to. uh, when I made that premarital counseling book, I made it really, it came down to a lot of frustrations that I had where I was seeing clients that were coming in who had been recently married, and they were having these questions. I'm like, wasn't this something that you dealt with and talked about in premarital counseling? Or before, you got married at your church, didn't your pastor or your deacon, didn't they to you about it? And they would say, no, not really. We talked about praying together. We talked
Yeah.
about, being a family, remembering to be keeping God in our lives. We
Yeah.
talked about having children. We talked about, if we had any spiritual or other issues, to come to the church and talk to them about it. But we didn't kind of get into the nitty gritty when it came to our racial tensions that we had with one another, or
Right.
the sister-in-law that we that I don't care for, the brother-in-law that I don't care for. They didn't really
Yes.
talk about those things. Also, I wrote it because I was working with a lot of clients who identify within the LGBTQ community, and I would try to find couples counseling resources, and it had the heteronormative pronouns in there, he, she, and it didn't include everybody.
Yes.
It did not
Mhm.
consider all aspects of relationships, and it just didn't touch on to things like death and dying and finances. It didn't touch on those things, and
Yeah.
other resources. So premarital counseling for me, I feel, is a necessity. And the book was also given because I understand that people have different financial needs and backgrounds, and they may not be able to afford to go for counseling via therapy, depending on their insurance and other issues surrounding
Right.
it. So it was something that can be used in conjunction with their therapy as well as individually on their own, that they can really reprocess and just make sure that their relationship is on the right track, and that the person that they're marrying lines up to their individual needs. But as regards to seeing people come in for premarital counseling, we see it's increasing more. I would say during COVID, it's happened where we have gotten more calls for people that
Wow.
are in need of premarital counseling, and who are dating, and they just coming in for dating counseling to talk about the issues surrounding their relationship. Now, we also still get couples. I mean, that was the beginning of the
Yeah.
pandemic. We got hit with a lot of
Oh
married
yeah.
couples, a
Yeah.
whole lot of married couples that
Mhm.
have come in regards to issues with their relationship. Because
Mhm.
for some people, on one side, you had the couples who were used to being apart,
Yeah.
and then they were all the time together.
Yeah.
And then on the other end, we had couples who were all the time together, and they were now all of a sudden becoming apart because one partner was going to work while another person was staying at home.
Right.
And so we started seeing like the both, ends of it. But yeah, now it's starting to transition from being married couples, which is still there, to a lot more premarital couples, and people who are just dating.
Wow. That's that's really awesome.
Mhm.
Because we talk about the high divorce rate and everything, and infidelity and just, unfulfilling marriages, but if people can be proactive and
Yeah.
start getting in therapy, to start getting that coaching, because you don't know what you don't know, or you
Hmm.
don't see what you don't see. And so just having someone like you there to help and be that neutral person to
Mhm.
help observe relationship dynamics and just help ask those tough questions that one person may be, nervous, scared to say or explore. I mean, that's just so invaluable, and that will help save marriages. It really
Yes, it will. I think that with therapy becoming something that is more acceptable in society, and again with different cultures as well,
will.
a lot of people are starting to come into into therapy or seek therapy. But I think also another aspect of it is people are starting to get more educated on what therapy really is, because depending on the community and the background that you're from, therapy was viewed very differently. One aspect, you have therapy viewed for people who they consider the mentally challenged, or people who they feel like really are, you know, um, having a lot of mental health issues.
Yeah.
And so they will say, okay, when I think of therapy, I think of white jackets. Is like a lot of people's
Hmm.
viewpoint. White jackets, they're going to put me in a facility, they're going to pump a whole bunch of medication into me, and I'm just going to be walking like a zombie. And that's what they
Yes.
think of therapy. And then you have the cultural aspects where, depending on the culture, on one end, they say, well, you don't go to a therapist and tell them your business, you keep it inside the family. You
Hmm.
tell the family your business, but the family sometimes is the most traumatic place to tell you your business.
Yes.
So then you have that aspect, and then you have, the cultural aspect where they don't even know what therapy is because it's not something that is talked about. And so when they come over and they're like, okay, well, that's what therapy is. I've only seen it on TV, because we don't really have those places in my country, of origin. We don't
Right.
have them there. But there's a hospital that, we had an uncle that went to, and we haven't seen,
Hmm.
because one day they were very upset and something happened, and uncle is gone. We don't know where uncle
Right.
is. Um, and so now that it is being more advertised and talked about, even just on celebrity approach, political approach, they're
Yeah.
talking about therapy and seeking out the services. More people are starting to learn, and more people are starting to seek them out.
Absolutely. And so we talked about expectations earlier about in relationships and from others, but what should people's expectations be from therapy? If you're just dating, or for people who are engaged or about to be engaged, or people who are even married, what should they expect to gain from therapy, and what should they expect to give? What kind of work should they expect to do in therapy?
Well, I'm going to say the work they expect to do is going to depend on the type of therapy and the type of therapy style that they practice. Um, Most therapists will, if they're CBT homework related like I am, I give a lot of homework assignments. Expectations that they have. Number one is that I think that clients come in with, tell me what to do.
Yes.
That is not what therapy is.
Right.
We do not tell you what to do. We do not have a plan out laid out for you, like you do this, 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 this. And people come in and they get very frustrated with that. They say, I can't believe you're not going to tell me what to do. I'm paying for this. I'm like, but that's not what therapy is. Um, I always tell people that, it's more of a sense of a self-awareness that I feel like you already have within yourself. When I
Hmm.
have sessions with people, they come up with their aha moments like all the time. Like, wait a minute, did I just say what I think I just said? Is that what really I've been dealing with for all this time? And you sit
Wow.
there and you say, okay, well, you've gotten yourself, you figured it out. How did you get there? They look at the homework
Wow.
assignments and the different things that we provide to them as resources to, I say guidance loosely, as a guidance for them, but
Yeah.
not in the sense of, when they come in, they say, well, this is exactly what I'm going to be doing. This is exactly what's going to be happening. I'm going to be done with therapy within 3 months. I'm going to come every day at this time, and we're going to be good to go. It is a journey. It is a
Yes.
process that you take with the assistance of your therapist there, but
Okay.
it is not something where the therapist tells you what to do or hands you
Hmm.
a blueprint of everything to do.
Right.
Even with the homework assignments, people still assess afterwards. Well, why did I write that? Let me think about this. Let me look at this, and this is really a concern for me that I think that I need to work through. It's a
Yes.
continuous journey. It is continuously processing and working. in order to get to your overall goal. And like you said earlier, things change. Your goal may have been your goal when you came in the door day one, but it may not be your goal day 30. You may say, wait a minute, I don't even know why I even came up with that. We sat down and decided that was going to be my goal. That's not what I want. This is what I want instead.
Yeah.
I've done some more, especially when it comes to couples. They will come in and say, I want to, sadly, they'll say, I want to save my marriage and, stay married. And we go through the processes together. They start learning about the power and control wheel, which is something I teach a lot of domestic violence clients about. And they realize, wait a minute, I'm in a domestic violence relationship this entire time. This entire time I am. I don't want to fix this relationship. I think that now our new goal is to figure out a way to go separately. And then you have people who come in that say, I want to end this relationship. I'm done. And then we go through and we talk about expectations. They realize, well, I wasn't communicating it correctly to them. And they see changes in the relationship and they see the relationship get better. And at the end, they're like, yeah, we're going to get married. We figured out what was the issues. So, it is a journey. I will say it like that. It is a journey that you could expect. You could expect a therapist to, be there for you within boundaries. I will say within boundaries, because the therapists out there are going to say they're probably clapping right now, within boundaries. To help you to, get to your goal, that these are your goals, not the therapist's goals. These are your goals that you set for yourself, that we help you to guide you to that point.
So with the boundaries for the therapist, if you could briefly describe those, because I've heard, and I've been in therapy myself for a long time. And so I've talked to people who are new going to therapy and they'll complain and say, well, I don't feel like my therapist, she wasn't there for me. It's minor complaints. And I think it goes back to unrealistic expectations, or we closely bond. I mean, your therapist is one of the most important, maybe become one of the most important critical people in your life, because they're helping you on one of the most important journeys of your life. And so what are some of those boundaries that people should expect and adhere to? And I know that most therapists do outline them and when you form that relationship, but just for people in the audience who aren't familiar and may not be aware of, what are the realistic expectations that you should have for your therapist?
So I think that, and you're right. Most, I won't say the most, all of us usually have when you set up for your appointment, your therapist will talk to you about boundaries. And of course, just being, understanding what their role is. I know that for a lot of people, they're like, my therapist is my best friend. Unfortunately, we're not.
Right.
I know that I've had times, and I talk to the clients about this as well. If I say, and I say this on the first day, if I see you out in public, it's not because I don't like you. I will not speak to you.
Yes.
And that is because I'm respecting, your privacy, and because of, all the legal aspects of it. We are supposed to not really let out any of your health information. And so you have to think about it. If I see you out in public, I'm with either, my husband or my kids, the first thing they're going to say, I don't know that person.
Right.
Got to be a client. That's what they would say. So I tell them, if I see you, I will walk right on by. It's not me ignoring you because I don't like you. It's because of, I have to respect, the ethical boundaries and the requirements. And, we just can't do that. That's one thing. You will have clients who will try to give extravagant gifts, depending on the clinical training of the clinician. So social work, mental health, psychiatry, they have their own ethical guidelines. Some, and most of them are under $25 gifts, because people have tried to gift their therapists with very expensive things. Some therapists won't take anything. Some therapists will say no. There's a boundary. Calling, depending on your therapist and how they have their rules set up, they'll explain those boundaries to their clients. But I know that people go into therapy and think my therapist is my best friend. That's the biggest one. And unfortunately, we're not, that's not our role.
Right.
They will feel kind of an abandonment problem sometimes when therapists say, I'm starting to notice that you're not getting a therapeutic relationship out of this. And I'm starting to see that you're starting to see this as a friendship. And the problem with that is their lack of ability to continue to grow when it
Right.
comes to meeting their goals because they get too attached.
Yeah.
And that's when the therapist will say, I think we should transition to somebody else because it's not that I don't like you. It's because, you can't meet your goals if you're coming in here and we're best friends.
Right.
You want to be comfortable,
Yes.
but there is a fine line. There is
Yes.
a fine line.
Absolutely. Is there anything that you want to add about dating or therapy that we haven't covered? There's so much we could talk about on this.
Yeah. For therapy, I'm really glad that more people are getting involved in therapy. I think also something that I always like to mention is there's a difference between therapy and coaching, which right now, so in the media, what we see, and I won't say her name, but in the media, what we see a lot of times is certain professionals who, are talking to people about, their relationships or issues, and they're on TV.
Yeah.
And a person may say, oh, well, I need to find a therapist like that. They may not necessarily be a licensed therapist. They might be a life coach,
Right.
which operates very differently than therapy, itself. Um,
Right.
there's nothing wrong with coaching, but if you are
Yes.
looking for that, make sure that you know the different types of therapists and, the difference between therapist and coaching and making sure that you find what fits your needs. I always tell clients to find a therapist that you will be able to feel aligned to your individual needs as well as your cultural needs. We have had times, especially during this time period,
Yes.
where clients will specifically look for an African American female. That is your right, absolutely, to look for an African American female. If that's what you look for, that's what you should get. I get agitated when certain outstanding facilities will push them to say, well, even though you want an African American female, there's another therapist that, is not a
Yeah.
female, is not African American. You can give them a try. Because what that is going to do is just push that person back even further. They're going to view
Right.
therapy differently. They may not feel connected to that therapist. And, it essentially should not happen. As a client, you sometimes have to advocate for yourself and push for yourself to say, this is what I want, this is what I need, and look for it. Unfortunately, right now, there is a drastic shortage of therapists because of our current situation with the pandemic, and of course with more people getting into therapy. And so finding those therapists are very difficult, but look at the multitude of different platforms to try to find a therapist that definitely fits your needs, meets your insurance requirements or financial requirements, and are licensed in the state of where you reside. And I say that because I get calls from all over. We've gotten calls from California, we've gotten calls from Washington State, we've gotten calls from outside the country. Now, I'll practice outside the country a little bit different, but inside the United States, we have to be licensed in the state that we're residing, depending on the licensing laws. So, or where the client is residing, I apologize, where the client is residing, depending on the licensing laws. And we will get clients that will call and complain and say, I know you're not licensed in California, but I can't find any therapists that have openings. Can you see me? If that board doesn't approve it, we can't.
Right.
But I would always, think that every client, every person should try therapy at least once. Give it a try, see if it's for you. Look at the different types of therapists. Trauma informed therapists. There's therapists with CBT, DBT. There's different types of therapy, but make sure you find one that fits you best. And if the therapist doesn't work or you don't feel a connection, it's okay to disconnect and find someone else. And it's okay for you to ask the therapist to provide you with somebody else. That is our job, is to make sure that if the care with us doesn't work, that we could provide you with resources to somewhere else that we hope would work.
Right.
But don't give up on your therapy journey, especially when you feel like you need that help.
Thank you. That's so wonderful, and that's important for people to hear. Very important for people to hear, as particularly about the cultural aspects of it, and And you and I, when we first spoke, we talked about that at length. And it's just,
Mhm.
it's hopefully more people are inspired, to go into therapy. It's because there's a need. I think I read
Yeah.
somewhere that over the next few years, and this was even pre-COVID, but
Mhm.
over the next few years, the need for therapists and coaches and thank you also for making that distinction between
Mhm.
coaches and therapists, because I often use the word coaching in relation to therapy, even though
Mhm.
therapists are not like your coaches. So thank you very much for making that distinction, because it's important for people to be aware that those are two different functions and roles, and you can have both. Like
Yes, you
I
can.
have both.
Mhm. Mhm.
So they all complement each other.
Yeah.
So yeah, it
Yeah.
takes
And we
courage.
Yeah, 100%. And I've referred clients to coaches if they feel like that therapy to them, or they've gone through therapy and they say, what, I want a coach now. I want to, try coaching.
Mhm.
Um, we work together,
Yeah,
not against one another. That's the
right.
belief that I have. And, I'm always in support of anybody in the helping profession that's out there to help one another,
Yeah,
because I don't view it as a competition. There are some therapists people who do view it as competition, but I don't. I think that therapists and coaches can align and work together, just like we work with doctors. We work
absolutely.
together with them, psychiatrists, psychologists. We all work together. So, yeah, I think you're right. The amount of therapist needs um, after COVID is going to be a lot.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
I think that if you already are feeling um, that anxiety, or that
Mhm.
depression, or experienced any type of trauma, seek therapy services out. Give them a try in your local area. Reach out to therapists who are virtually. My practice right now is currently virtually. Um, and if you want to do face to face, there's some clinicians that still are practicing in office as well. There's some home based therapy clinicians as well. So there's mobile therapy also, which is when they come out to your home. So there's an array of us within that village that all work together to try to help people all around. And I just hope that if anything comes from this, that a lot of clients, couples, decide to seek out therapy, even if it's something minor that they've had issues about. Because I always tell clients something minor usually leads to something a lot bigger,
Yes,
because they don't even address those smaller issues.
absolutely. Well, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for
Thank
having me. I,
you.
had a blast. I hope that this does help somebody out there to get therapy services.
I am so excited for your new publication, and that'll be coming out in the spring. And so the audience, they can that'll be available for pre-order soon.
Yes.
And it'll be publishing this spring, and they can go to oliviabaylor.com to do pre-orders, or follow up on the release. And then I'll also include information on sheconfidential.com. But audience, we have been joined today by Miss Olivia Baylor, and thank you so much again
Thank you for
for
having
being here
me.
today and for all you do, because ooh, it's a lot of healing, and it's a lot of healing work to be done. So thank you for your part and all you do. I mean, because it's empowering. So the work that you do is so important. And we need like to clone you. So so thank you. Thank you, audience. My name is Charlene Ketchum, and this is On Her Terms Defined. And I will see you all next time.